no females. Mosquitoes are born.
There's less female mosquitoes to actually do the biting, and there are less female mosquitoes to actually do the breeding.
They said it would save lives, that releasing genetically altered mosquitoes into our neighborhoods would end dengue, crush Zika, and even wipe out malaria.
The plan to release genetically modified mosquitoes is meant to eventually stop mosquito breeding and stop the diseases that mosquitoes spread, like Zika and dengue.
But no one warned us about the hybrid offspring that refused to die, or the pollinators that vanished soon after. Behind closed doors, corporations raced to weaponize genetics while entire ecosystems quietly shifted. And when you hear what scientists later uncovered in Brazil's mosquito zones, you won't believe who was really behind it.
In Brazil, where they tried this, they reduced the mosquito population by 95%. They're wanting to do experiments like that in the US, but they're running into environmental concerns.
The mosquito invasion that was planned. In 2012, an eerie kind of invasion quietly began. In towns like Jacobina, Brazil, and remote parts of the Cayman Islands, scientists started releasing massive swarms of mosquitoes into the air. But these weren't ordinary insects. They were genetically engineered to die. Developed by a United Kingdom-based biotech firm named Oxitec, the mosquitoes carried a self-limiting gene that would kill their offspring in the larval stage, effectively collapsing local mosquito populations over time. But here's the kicker. They only released males, since only female mosquitoes bite humans. The idea? Let the sterile males mate, then watch the mosquito population vanish in a generation. At the time, this sounded unreal, but governments and biotech investors embraced it. In places like the Cayman Islands, dengue fever cases had been surging uncontrollably. Traditional sprays weren't working. Entire regions were being held hostage by this disease. So Oxitec's offer felt like a miracle cure. No chemicals, no new species, just one tweak to Mother Nature. By 2015, Florida's Keys became the next test site. Thousands of locals opposed it, even launching petitions. But in 2016, Oxitec got the green light, largely based on small-scale trials and promises that the genes wouldn't spread. Over 750 million mosquitoes were approved for release in later phases. What many people didn't realize was the scale behind this plan. Oxitec's biolabs bred mosquitoes by the millions, sorting males from females using high-speed vision systems and releasing them using drone-like boxes. According to MIT Technology Review, by 2019, Oxitec had the capacity to breed up to 20 million mosquitoes per week, and they weren't the only ones. Google's parent company, Alphabet Incorporated, quietly backed its own mosquito control tech through a project called Verily. The public saw headlines about DNA mosquitoes and biotech bugs, but very few understood the scope. Behind the scenes, this wasn't just a public health mission, it was a new kind of biotech gold rush. The global mosquito control market was expected to surpass $2 billion by the mid-2020s, and modified mosquitoes had become the hottest gamble. But skeptics raised serious concerns. What if mosquitoes built resistance to the inserted gene? What if females were accidentally released? What if predators like birds and bats altered their diets? These weren't hypothetical worries. They were real possibilities. We'll get to what actually happened in a moment, because the results didn't go the way anyone expected. The unseen war against dengue, Zika, and malaria. If this all sounds extreme, it's because the threat was real. By 2012, dengue fever was infecting up to 400 million people annually, according to the World Health Organization. Spread by Aedes aegypti, this virus turned ordinary neighborhoods into hotbeds of high fever, intense joint pain, and even hemorrhaging. There was no vaccine, there was no cure, and in places like Brazil and the Philippines, entire hospital wings were being overwhelmed. Then came Zika virus, which exploded in 2015 and 2016, especially in South America. For most adults, Zika was mild, but for pregnant women, it was devastating. Thousands of babies were born with microcephaly, abnormally small heads and underdeveloped brains. The link to Aedes aegypti was undeniable. Suddenly, the idea of genetically sabotaging mosquitoes didn't seem radical, it seemed urgent. In the background loomed malaria, which still killed over 600,000 people every year, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa. Even in countries where malaria had been under control, resistance to insecticides was returning with a vengeance. Mosquitoes were literally evolving to survive our poisons. One study in Burkina Faso showed that over 90% of mosquitoes had developed resistance to pyrethroid-based sprays, the most common form of chemical control. Health officials were now caught in a dangerous game. Do nothing and let viruses spread. The modified mosquito became a symbol of high-tech hope, a desperate counterstrike against 3 of the deadliest viruses on Earth. But many public health experts feared what came next would be science gone too far. The unexpected twist: mosquito DNA in the wild. When Oxitec began releasing genetically modified Aedes aegypti mosquitoes, their assurances were firm. The inserted gene, called OX513A, would self-destruct in the wild. The male mosquitoes, genetically engineered to carry a lethal gene, would pass it on to their offspring, which would die before reaching adulthood. In theory, this meant the gene would disappear with the mosquito population, never entering the wild permanently. But in 2019, a peer-reviewed study published in the journal Scientific Reports turned that theory on its head. Researchers from Yale University found up to 60% of sampled wild mosquitoes contained fragments of Oxitec's transgenes. Somehow, the gene had slipped through the safeguards. The hybrid offspring were not only surviving, they were thriving. This was never supposed to happen. Oxitec responded by questioning the study's methodology, claiming the inserted gene was no longer active and that no harm had been done. But the genie was out of the bottle. The experiment had unintentionally altered the native mosquito genome. The hybrid mosquitoes were now more genetically diverse and potentially more robust than their purebred counterparts. Scientists began to worry about the hybrid vigor effect, where crossbreeding results in stronger, more adaptable organisms. Could these hybrid mosquitoes become resistant to insecticides or more efficient at transmitting diseases? There was no evidence yet, but the door was now open to long-term consequences no one had modeled. It wasn't just about Aedes aegypti. Ecologists raised red flags about predators, such as fish, frogs, and birds that eat mosquito larvae. What happens when genetically modified larvae enter aquatic food chains? What if the DNA crosses into unexpected species through lateral gene transfer? Theories, some grounded, others speculative, began flying across scientific conferences. More troubling still was the lack of global regulation. Unlike medicines or food products, genetically modified insects had no universal oversight body. Each country set its own standards, or lacked them altogether. Some called it biotech colonialism, where wealthy companies exported untested tech to developing countries under the guise of philanthropy. Brazil and the Cayman Islands had become the testing grounds for a global experiment with no clear finish line. And here's the eerie part: the mosquitoes kept changing. In late 2020, Oxitec announced a new second-generation strain with a fluorescent marker gene, allowing them to better track survival. That update confirmed what critics feared. The original strain had not performed exactly as promised, and the biotech firm was pivoting fast. Alphabet's secret mosquito factory. While Oxitec was grabbing headlines, Verily, a life sciences division of Alphabet Incorporated, Google's parent company, was quietly running its own mosquito control program. But their approach was entirely different. They weren't using gene editing or CRISPR. Instead, they turned to something simpler and arguably more unsettling: robotic mass sterilization. In 2017, Verily launched the Debug Project, a pilot program in Fresno County, California. Their technique focused on the Wolbachia bacterium, a naturally occurring microbe that, when introduced into male Aedes aegypti, prevents successful reproduction. Unlike Oxitec, no genes were edited. Instead, Verily's engineers developed automated systems to sort, sterilize, and release over 15 million mosquitoes in just a few months, using algorithms and conveyor belts. What stunned observers was the scale. Inside a nondescript building near Silicon Valley, Verily had created a fully automated insect production line. Robots identified males, infected them with Wolbachia, and boxed them for release, up to 1 million per week, all while AI monitored population density and mating patterns. It was a mosquito kill chain built by software engineers, not entomologists. According to The Atlantic, Verily's approach avoided many regulatory hurdles, since it didn't involve genetic modification. But it raised other concerns. Would constant releases of Wolbachia-infected mosquitoes shift the microbiome of native populations? What happens when these males mate with females from different regions? How long do their sterile effects last in the wild? What was clear is that Alphabet didn't treat this like a side project. They invested heavily, partnered with the CDC, and began expanding to Singapore and Australia, where dengue outbreaks were surging. In some ways, Verily's factory outpaced Oxitec's, more scalable, less controversial, and backed by Silicon Valley's data-crunching muscle. But here's the twist. Verily was tight-lipped. Public documents about the project's deeper results were scarce. Critics questioned whether the data was being shared transparently or privately harvested to fuel machine learning algorithms. Was this truly a public health mission or a live trial for future biological engineering platforms? Either way, it showed one thing. We were no longer just killing mosquitoes. We were programming them. The strange rise of mosquito-linked autoimmune reactions. In the aftermath of large-scale mosquito modification programs, doctors in several test regions began reporting unusual patterns in patient symptoms, particularly involving new or aggravated autoimmune responses. While no official causation has been established, the correlation has raised eyebrows. In northeast Brazil, where genetically modified Aedes aegypti were released across multiple cities, clinics began observing a rise in unexplained inflammatory responses and atypical skin conditions between 2016 and 2019. Patients complained of rash-like symptoms that didn't align with classic mosquito-borne infections like dengue or Zika. In some cases, swelling occurred at non-bite locations, and symptoms lingered for weeks or returned cyclically. Doctors initially attributed the reactions to other environmental triggers, pollution, water contaminants, or undiagnosed pathogens. But a 2020 paper published in The Lancet Regional Health noted a statistical uptick in autoimmune flare-ups, such as lupus and rheumatoid arthritis, in zones where genetic or irradiated mosquitoes were deployed. While not conclusive, the study called for more investigation into whether engineered mosquito proteins or altered saliva compositions could provoke unexpected immune overreactions in susceptible individuals. Here's where things get even more bizarre. In several informal community health reports from parts of Florida's Monroe County, residents described being bitten by mosquitoes and experiencing reactions they had never had before, even those who had lived in mosquito-heavy regions for decades. "These bites feel different," one local said in a 2022 NPR interview. "They swell up, they itch worse, and I've had bruising from some." While this could easily fall into the category of anecdotal overreaction, entomologists confirmed that genetically modified male mosquitoes released in those areas could sometimes carry proteins from the lab breeding process, even though males technically don't bite. That opened up a previously unasked question. Can genetic modifications indirectly affect even non-biting mosquitoes through protein contamination or mating interactions? Another possibility raised by researchers: horizontal gene transfer, a process by which genetic material can move between organisms without traditional reproduction. While this is rare in multicellular organisms, some studies suggest that under the right conditions, modified deoxyribonucleic acid sequences can influence bacteria or parasites living within a host, possibly altering how the immune system responds to mosquito encounters. The most eyebrow-raising theory floated by critics: that mosquitoes bred in sterile lab environments may lose natural microbial balances in their saliva or gut, leading to new bacterial byproducts when they mix with native populations. Those byproducts, some suspect, could subtly change the immune triggers introduced to humans when bitten. Of course, major biotech companies deny any link. Oxitec has stated clearly that their genetically modified males do not bite and cannot affect human biology directly. Verily, using sterilized males via Wolbachia, claims their microbes occur naturally in ecosystems. Still, several public health experts insist the long-term immunological effects of engineered or sterile mosquitoes remain grossly understudied. The black market for genetically modified mosquitoes. As strange as it sounds, by 2023, whispers began emerging in biotech forums, online marketplaces, and even encrypted messaging groups about a black market involving genetically modified mosquitoes. Initially dismissed as a fringe conspiracy, the claims gained traction when investigators uncovered that unauthorized mosquito breeding kits and modified larvae were being sold through dark web vendors, claiming ties to research labs in Asia and South America. The kits were allegedly modeled after Oxitec's original gene drive blueprints, but with fewer safety measures and, in some cases, experimental tweaks. A disturbing 2023 report from Brazil's Federal Environmental Agency, IBAMA, confirmed they had intercepted illegal mosquito breeding units being operated in a rural area outside São Paulo. The lab they found was reverse engineering sterilization techniques using black market instructions downloaded from anonymized websites. According to the agency, the operators weren't trying to stop disease. They were engineering regional mosquito suppression for profit, offering clients area clearance in exchange for money, favor, or property advantage. This exposed a chilling twist. Mosquito control had quietly become a weapon. In real estate-heavy zones of Brazil, developers were reportedly using modified mosquito releases to devalue neighboring plots suffering dengue outbreaks, while keeping their own land clean for tourism or resale. One whistleblower in Colombia claimed that certain ecotourism resorts were buying sterilized male mosquitoes illegally to keep their areas bite-free without attracting regulatory attention. What made the situation more volatile was the ease of replication. According to a 2022 expose in Nature Biotechnology, once the gene sequences and methods were leaked, DIY biohackers could, in theory, modify Aedes aegypti at home using a three-dimensional printed lab and over-the-counter CRISPR kits. In fact, some biohacker YouTube channels began to allude, cryptically, to experiments with mosquito genetics, though most were taken down after public concern. But why would anyone risk this? Because mosquito-driven diseases still cripple economies and displace millions, and the line between public health and private control is razor-thin. In war-torn or unstable regions, rumors began circulating that weaponized mosquitoes, modified to carry disease or manipulate ecosystems, were being considered as low-cost alternatives to conventional warfare. These claims remain unverified, but they echo real historical attempts, such as Japan's Unit 731, which used disease-bearing insects during World War II. Biotech firms have since ramped up security, encrypting gene sequences and limiting lab access. But the genie may already be out. The fact that genetically modified mosquitoes can now be hacked, duplicated, and distributed without oversight has stunned the global scientific community. The secret role of mosquitoes in biosurveillance networks. While most of the world focused on mosquitoes as a threat vector for disease, a growing number of tech and defense researchers were exploring a shocking new use case: mosquitoes as biosurveillance drones. In 2018, the Pentagon's Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, funded a controversial project under its Insect Allies program. Officially, the goal was to use insects to deliver protective genes to crops in case of biological attacks. But several independent scientists and watchdog groups sounded the alarm. Could insects, particularly flying ones like mosquitoes, be repurposed as covert data collectors or biological spies? That theory gained traction in 2020 when patent filings from tech companies began surfacing, describing biohybrid sensor systems that could be attached to or embedded within insects. These microdevices, sometimes smaller than a grain of rice, were designed to harvest environmental data, monitor human biometrics, like body temperature or carbon dioxide emissions, and even track movement through Bluetooth-like short-range signals. Here's the eerie twist. Aedes aegypti, the very mosquito species targeted for genetic control, is highly anthropophilic. It prefers humans over animals, is active during the day, and has been shown to memorize scent trails and home locations. That makes it a perfect candidate for passive surveillance in dense urban environments. By 2021, a Japanese research team successfully equipped live mosquitoes with ultralight sensors that could detect movement, humidity, and heat levels. The findings were published in Science Robotics. Though the team framed the research as ecological monitoring, it quickly raised ethical concerns about weaponization or unauthorized human tracking. In the private sector, Verily's Debug Project, a Google-affiliated initiative, used extensive machine learning and mapping tools to track mosquito flight paths and behavior patterns. Publicly, it was marketed as a tool to optimize disease suppression. But skeptics pointed out that Verily had access to billions of behavioral data points, where mosquitoes clustered, where people emitted more carbon dioxide, even where blood types were more common, since some mosquitoes prefer type O. Could this data be merged with artificial intelligence surveillance networks to track population behavior or monitor biosignals at scale? In 2023, an investigative piece in The Intercept claimed that defense contractors had begun exploring exactly that, fusing biodrones like insects with neighborhood-level surveillance grids. In their words, why fly a drone when nature built millions for you? While no government has openly admitted to deploying mosquitoes as surveillance tools, the infrastructure now exists. Between biocompatible microchips, CRISPR-based behavior programming, and artificial intelligence flight path prediction, we are entering an era where genetically modified insects could act as both medicine and monitoring device. Think that's far-fetched? DARPA's own 2022 report admits the feasibility of autonomous mobile biological sensors and even lays out protocols for deploying them in disaster zones, refugee camps, or hostile territories, ostensibly for public health. The question now is, are mosquitoes still just pests, or have they become the quietest tools in the global surveillance arms race? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you're into real stories with disturbing twists, make sure to subscribe so you never miss what's coming next.